Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. The other day I got a comment on one of my videos asking if they could buy the drawings or the documentation on one of my designs. I forget if it was the blunderbuss or the beta pattern muzzleloader itself, but either way the design is essentially the same mechanism. So I've been thinking about this from the standpoint of atomic rifling and creative operations, for whom I developed the beta pattern muzzleloader design. And I wanted to let you in on what I'm contemplating, and for what it's worth, I guess, let you weigh in with any input on this issue. Now, where we're at right now is that the beta pattern muzzleloader is not really revolutionary enough to be patentable, and even if it was, frankly, patent attorneys are so expensive that I'm not sure if we'd be able to go that route. So the design is being controlled as sort of a trade secret. I mean, there was a lot of engineering effort that went into designing it and fine-tuning the mechanism and developing the production process, designing jigs and tooling and so forth to produce it efficiently. So, in order to compensate me for the time that I spent engineering this design, the company has to be able to make some money on the muzzleloaders that it's producing. Now, that said, interestingly enough, we've come to a point where, despite our very limited production capacity, the bottleneck in muzzleloader sales actually has proved to be distribution. We've been going with a company called Dollarhide Mercantile. That's another little startup here in Idaho, and they've been having technical difficulties with their website, and then issues with their payment processor. And I think at this point their website is somewhat functional, but it's proved to be more difficult than we or they thought to get that up and running, or to get distribution really set up in an effective fashion. And so, with distribution actually being the bottleneck, I'm wondering if it could actually be profitable to release the production documentation in some form. As I developed the production method, I wrote up a detailed document that goes through and explains exactly how to produce a beta pattern muzzleloader. That document obviously is being carefully guarded at this point in time, but the question is, is that really the right approach, or could we make more, could the company make more money by just distributing that document in some form? And there's a couple of ways that could happen. Normally when big companies license technologies to each other, they'll draw up a licensing agreement and, agree to pay a certain number of royalties or a certain dollar amount or percentage of royalties on units that are made and sold by the other company. And they have, contracts departments to draw up the agreement and to monitor the contract and so forth, and they have legal departments that can enforce those contracts. And small companies like atomic rifling and creative operations that don't have a contracts department, don't have a legal department, and would not be in a good position to enforce that kind of an agreement, that may not be a really good option to pursue. It might be a lot simpler just to publish the production document and sell it for a high enough price that if other companies started producing them and competing with us, we wouldn't be sorry that we published it. Now, question then becomes, well, how much would we have to charge for the document to do that? And in principle, that's a simple calculation. We just figure up the net present value of muzzleloader sales into perpetuity and then divide that by the number of copies of the document that would be sold. in practice, estimating the number of muzzleloaders that would be sold into perpetuity and the number of copies of the document that would actually get sold is almost impossible to do accurately. So it would end up being just kind of a wild guess as to how much we'd need to charge, and I don't know if that would come to $100 or $1,000 or what. But that's one option to consider. The other issue, though, with that approach is that I think the primary interest in documentation on the beta pattern muzzleloader design and related designs is not so much from companies that are looking to produce them and compete with Atomic Rifling and Creative Operations LLC. It's more from just individual hobbyists who are interested in building a muzzleloader for themselves. And that in itself presents a bit of a problem because the documentation is currently written to support batch production. When I was developing the production process, I tried to optimize it for maximum production efficiency when we're producing, batches of 5 to 10 muzzleloaders. And so the way I did that is by developing a lot of jigs and fixtures and so forth that are used to hold parts. And so the current production document, in telling you how to make a part, it's going to say, well, first you cut out a blank that's this shape. And then you put it in this jig and you make this cut. And then you put it in this other jig and you drill this hole, and so on and so forth. And that kind of an approach using these standardized jigs eliminates a lot of the setup time and really saves you a lot of time when you're doing the machining on multiple units. But in order to produce a single muzzleloader by this process, that means first you've got to machine all of the jigs and fixtures so that you can follow the process. And obviously I have documentation on how to produce the jigs and fixtures, included in the production document. But still, if you're only producing one muzzleloader, the amount of time that you'd spend producing all those jigs and fixtures is going to vastly outweigh the time savings that you would reap when you actually produce the muzzleloader. If you're only going to produce one, it would be much more efficient just to have drawings of each part and maybe use a more, I wouldn't say more complex, but use a more specialized setup for machining them with standard tooling. Now, I guess I could rewrite or produce another version of the production document that's tailored more to one-off production. However, that would be a non-trivial amount of engineering and tech writing work in and of itself, because I'd basically have to completely rewrite the document, and I'd have to prepare a lot of drawings that show the finished part and all the dimensions of the finished part, instead of relying on the jigs to set the dimensions as they currently do in the existing documentation. So if I were to produce an alternate document, then with that, we wouldn't have to worry so much about, other companies competing with Atomic Rifling and Creative Operations by buying the document, but we'd still want to sell that document for enough to compensate me for the time that I spent producing that document. And once again, I'm not sure how we're going to estimate how many copies we could sell so that we could divide up my engineering effort and engineering labor wages by the number of copies. So those are kind of the three options that I was thinking of. Either contract-based licensing, publishing the production document as is, or writing up more of a hobbyist-focused one-off production document. I guess the fourth option would be do nothing or just kind of wait. And really, eventually, I do plan to publish a lot of this information through other sources, or, there's a lot of interest anymore in firearms history. And so both in my hobby projects and in the stuff I've been doing for Atomic Rifling and Creative Operations LLC, I keep good notes, I keep good documentation, and my thought is eventually to publish that documentation in sort of a historical memoir almost, a technical memoir, that provides my original, first-hand documentation of these designs. That said, it's going to be a while before that's produced. In the case of the beta pattern muzzleloader, obviously, I can't publish a book about the history of that endeavor until that endeavor has run its course. So I'm probably going to end up splitting up that documentation into a couple of different volumes, because I've got enough material that I'm pretty close to being able to publish a volume on my hobbies up to this point as it is, although I'm sure I'm at least a year to a year and a half away from publishing that, and I know I've been saying that for a couple of years now, but every time I think I'm getting close, I come up with another project that I just have to include in that volume. So, there might be a volume about some of my hobby projects that'll be published in the next few years, but then if I do that, then the muzzleloader endeavor, the beta pattern muzzleloader and possibly other designs that I'm working on with Atomic Rifling and Creative Operations, will have to be published in a separate volume that would be delayed, or the publication of that second volume would be delayed until after this venture has run its course, and so that's not going to be out for probably at least another decade. So I don't know. I just wanted to let you in on kind of what I'm contemplating here, and if you have any brilliant ideas for how I can make the hobbyists happy without betraying my company, I'm certainly listening. I'm open to suggestions. I'm still contemplating this to try and decide what's the most equitable way to proceed as far as possible distribution of documentation on these designs. So, like I said, just kind of letting you in on what I'm contemplating today, and until next time, thank you for watching The Idahoan Show.